Joining us here to talk about the foundations and its milestones is writer, photographer, and music critic Craig Seymour. Craig, thanks for making time.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
How would you describe the time and conditions that house music was born in?
Well, I think what we're saying is that dance music really comes back into the mainstream in times when there's sort of a disconnect between gay visibility and conservative politics. Because if you go back into the 70s, disco emerged during the Nixon era and also during the rise of the religious right. If you look at house music in the 80s, you're talking about that as being a response to Reaganomics and a response to the AIDS crisis, and also just a response to the lack of social services and all sorts of overt homophobia. And now we come to, I guess, the Renaissance era. And, we have Legendary on TV and Pose and all of this gay visibility, but we also have anti-gay measures in Florida and the Supreme Court opening the path for there to be an overturning of gay marriage and sodomy laws and all sorts of things. So I really think it's very, very interesting how those patterns have continued to kind of recreate themselves.
What was the culture during the early house music days in the warehouse and the nightclub scene?
Well, unfortunately, I was like a New York club person. So I was never at the actual warehouse, when everything was going down, but we would hear stories, and it was almost like with hip hop, there was a whole new lingo introduced into dance culture. It was all about jack your body and everything like that. And first we were like, what is this? And then it just took over the New York nightclub sound, which had been kind of dominated by sort of electro freestyle sounds. And it was almost like somebody clicked a light, and then all of a sudden house music was everywhere. And then when House Music Anthem with those pianos, that really connected it with the tradition of gospel-based club music that's always been a big part of club music in New Jersey. So in the 80s, it all very quickly came together into this one huge thing that built upon the very early minimalist house tracks that were coming out of Chicago that were made in people's bedrooms, and then we get into the 90s where we started having like big pop hits like CeCe Peniston's Finally and Robin S.'s Show Me Love.
Frankie Knuckles was often called the godfather of house music. I'm going to play a little bit.
As well he should be.
Tell people about Frankie Knuckles.
I will say that just because there have been a few questions about that, but Frankie Knuckles is the one who, he's a New Yorker. So he started with Larry Levan, who was the legendary DJ at Paradise Garage. So basically he brought all of these post-disco South Soul records that were made in Philly to Chicago and really introduced people to those sounds. But of course, since most of those records were made in the late 70s, at a certain point he was running out of new material. So that's when the kids that were coming to the warehouse would take all of their instruments in the same way that hip hop producers used whatever they could get their hands on and started making tracks in an attempt to emulate those early South Soul records. But of course they couldn't, because those were made with huge orchestras and everything like that. So that's where we started getting the minimalist house sound. So he was one of the first to put on Jamie Principle's Your Love, which is considered one of the first house records. He also helped with Jamie Principle's Bad Boy, where he says, some people call me a queer, some people call me a freak, which is one of the first house records to really explicitly talk about the gay community. And then in 1988, Frankie actually left Chicago, which was an interesting time because there's one in this book by Micah Siland, Do You Remember House? Sauckland, rather. He talks about at one point they estimated that 4 out of 5 of the original warehouse members had died of AIDS at that point, even in 1988. So Frankie left Chicago and went to New York and began in production. So that's where we start getting all those glorious house remixes, which really transformed the culture because people were like, oh, this is a song I know, but this sounds totally different. You know what I mean? So he is absolutely the godfather of house because of the way that he walked house music through all of its many transitions.
So, Craig, I want to clear something up that you addressed on Twitter about house music, which is sometimes referred to as oons, oons, oons music. And I think there's this clip from, why is oons, oons possibly a microaggression?
Well, because it reflects so many ways that Black music has been sort of misconstructed in the past. I mean, just the very sort of like almost animalistic sound of the really goes back to the very early musicological writings on African music, which compared the music to the music of gorillas. You know, I hear all of that when I hear and then it's just becomes a way to reduce the musical complexity of the music to just the beat. You know, I mean, there's so much going on in house music. I mean, there are people that, you know, beautiful lyrics, beautiful piano lines, the wonderful church school vocalists that like Martha Wash, who add all sorts of emotional dimensions to the music. And then all we can do is describe it as oomps oomps. So I think it's just another way to reduce dance music and another way to reduce, Black music. And the other thing that concerns me, especially in this time of political conservatism, is that dehumanization, Brene Brown actually writes this, always starts with language. And when we look back at times that have been very conservative in the past and have led to unspeakable horrors, we always see the culture of a people being attacked and being ridiculed before we actually see the people physically being abused and dehumanized. So I start thinking about the ways that Jewish music was talked about during the early days of Nazi Germany, how Black music was talked about in the days of Nazi Germany, and people were warned against it. I start thinking about the way that rock and roll was spoken about in the days of Jim Crow, and people, you know, as degenerate music and everything like that. So anything where I feel that Black music is being reduced to less than what it is, it's another attempt to undermine Black cultural achievement, and it's another step toward dehumanizing Black people, because we are our culture.